They watched the rockets strike, the metal shriek, the smoke bloom, and then the unexpected. British officers turned away, politely declined the American weapon that had just pierced the side of a captured Panzer III. It was Egypt, 1942. The demonstration should have settled the question. Instead, the British said no. The reason is more shocking than pride or politics. Britain had already committed to a very different solution, one whose single brutal advantage fit the battlefield realities British infantry were about to face. Zero backblast, production already humming, practical survival. In 1941 and 1942, the front lines were changing faster than many armies could adapt. German tanks were growing heavier, their armor thicker, and the classic infantry tools, rifles, anti-tank rifles, and small-caliber guns were suddenly inadequate at realistic, close ranges. A theoretical fix existed, the shaped charge, the Monroe effect, a way for a relatively small warhead to focus explosive energy into a jet capable of punching through armor. The question that followed was not whether a shaped charge would work, but how to get that shaped charge into position to reach a tank and be fired by a soldier under fire. One approach threw a rocket from a shoulder tube, the American answer epitomized by the bazooka. Another approach still used rockets, but with different delivery and propellant choices tested by various manufacturers in Germany. The British settled on something that looked at first glance like a crude anti-tank flare, a spigot mortar that launched a shaped charge by pushing the bomb along a rod, the Projector Infantry Anti-Tank, the PIAT. Each path embodied a set of trade-offs. Which trade-off mattered most depended on where and how you expected to fight. If you were an American infantryman in open fields or deserts, a lightweight rocket launcher that could be slung and fired quickly was attractive. The bazooka was relatively light, about 18 pounds for the launcher, had a launch tube, and used a rocket motor to propel a shaped charge warhead. It required a two-man team for best effect, one to aim and fire, the other to help prepare and carry ammunition. It had a backblast, a column of burning propellant gases expelled out the rear when the rocket left the tube. That made firing simple and rapid, but it also created a dangerous signature, a flash and blast that warned anyone behind the firer, revealed a shooter's position to snipers and tank crews, and prevented firing from inside enclosed spaces. Contrast that with the PIAT. Heavier, clumsier, and terrifying to cock, the PIAT relied on a spigot, a rod that sat inside the launcher, and launched its bomb by striking a propellant charge at the base of the projectile. The weapon could weigh roughly in the low 30s in pounds. It demanded brute strength to cock and recock in action. Its effective ranges were shorter than the bazookas, and its ergonomics were far from elegant. Yet it had one decisive feature: no backblast. The PIAT expelled almost no hot gases backward when fired, allowing a soldier to squeeze off a shot from inside a ruined house, from a trench, or under the half-collapsed roof of a barn. Where the bazooka shouted its position to every observer, the PIAT whispered. That whisper mattered more than any test range stat. By 1943-1944, British infantry were preparing for campaigns that would make concealment and close-quarters fighting the norm. The hedgerows of Normandy, the shattered towns of Sicily and Italy, the rubble-strewn streets of Arnhem, these were places where a man who had to stand or crouch in the open to fire would be immediately vulnerable. A small advantage in the ability to fire from cover could mean the difference between killing a tank at a flank shot and being cut down before you got within range. Production timing sealed the fate. The PIAT was already moving into production in mid-1942, months before the bazooka arrived for British evaluation. Factories were retooled, operating procedures set, training programs rolled out. When American teams showed the bazooka penetrating a Panzer in Egypt, the question before British decision-makers was not whether the rocket worked, but whether switching to it would improve survivability for infantry already training with, and soon to be equipped with, the PIAT.
The result was pragmatic. Keep the system that matched doctrine and manufacturing reality. Accept its flaws because its strengths fit the expected fight. What follows is not a simple triumphal tale for one weapon and dismissal for the other. Both systems solved similar physics problems in different mechanical ways. Both had bright moments and sharp limitations. The bazooka was lighter and faster to reload. The Piat allowed concealed, low-signature shots. Both struggled against frontal armor and against defenses designed to defeat shaped charges like skirted plates and spaced armor. Both could fail when conditions or material quality interfered. The key to understanding Britain's refusal is to trace the logic that led from a battlefield problem to a manufacturing and doctrinal answer, and to see why zero backblast in those contexts was decisive. To appreciate the stakes, imagine infantrymen faced with a panzer emerging from a hedgerow 50 yards away in Normandy. The bazooka team needs a clear rear arc to fire safely. The backblast could throw up debris, ignite fuel, reveal a muzzle flash. The bazooka's effective combat ranges in practice were often significantly shorter than optimistic numbers in manuals, and reliability could falter in salty, humid conditions or when rockets failed to ignite. A bazooka shot could work brilliantly in the open if the crew had room and time. In a broken village, that room was rare. Now picture a British infantryman inside a ruined farmhouse, the kitchen hearth collapsed, the plaster fallen. A few yards from him is a street where a tank could appear. The Piat allows him to crawl to the window, mount the weapon, and fire without producing a dangerous blast behind him. No smoke plume to reveal his position. No need to step into a doorway to find a safe firing arc. That capability changed the tactical calculus for urban fighting. It favored ambush, concealment, and small unit initiative. British analysts later quantified the real effects. According to British Army analysis of the initial Overlord period, Piat teams were credited with knocking out around 7% of German tanks disabled in that phase. That number does not make the Piat a wonder weapon. It underlines that the tool was effective when employed in the circumstances it was designed for. More telling, perhaps, are the human stories, the close-in courage and the agonizing cost, where a Piat team closed with the enemy and struck at a tank from 6 yards or less. There are multiple Victoria Cross citations tied to actions involving Piat crews. Extreme acts of bravery in which soldiers used the weapon in desperate circumstances to stop armored threats and save comrades. One action often recounted occurred during the Italian campaign, where a private armed with a Piat charged point-blank against a tank to allow his unit to escape. Another famous instance is tied to Arnhem, where a platoon leader used the Piat with lethal effect in an urban counterattack that helped hold a critical street. These stories are powerful precisely because they are not tales of mechanical perfection. They are accounts of soldiers squeezing every last ounce of use from a weapon that demanded physical sacrifice and nerve. Specific names and details of these citations should be checked against primary records for accuracy. The personal cost of operating a Piat was obvious. Soldiers complained about its weight and the brutal force required to cock it, particularly after a long march or injured. Recocking after each shot could be an ordeal under fire. Premature detonations and occasional failures were also part of the grim ledger. Yet victims and survivors alike testified that when a Piat round struck in a vulnerable spot, side or rear armor, or at short standoff to exploit a shaped charge's jet, the results could be devastating. Those close-in successes reinforced the British decision to stick with the weapon that allowed such shots from concealed positions. The bazooka's record, meanwhile, is mixed but significant. It brought shaped charge technology to a much wider set of infantry units and influenced post-war designs worldwide. It was quicker to train crews on, easier to maintain, and far lighter in the shoulder. American doctrine and terrain preferences, more fighting in open expanses and mechanized infantry tactics, suited the bazooka's trade-offs.
But field reports revealed vulnerabilities, backblast that could expose a team, rockets that sometimes failed to ignite or stabilized poorly in adverse climates, and practical effective ranges often shorter than theoretical maximums. General observers noted these limits. Famously, some American commanders complained about the weapon's vulnerability in close-quarter ambushes where concealment was priceless. Neither weapon was a panacea. Both struggled against heavy frontal armor and against makeshift countermeasures. German efforts to defeat shaped charges by adding skirts, lengthening standoffs, or reinforcing slopes reduced the odds of a successful shot from any infantry system. Both the bazooka and the Piat required tactical creativity. Flank shots, ambushes, and combined arm support remained the ways to neutralize tanks reliably. A Piat team in an exposed field would be as vulnerable as a bazooka crew inside a collapsed house. Context decided the utility. Production pragmatics mattered just as much as doctrine. War economies are burdensome things. Factories have schedules, supply chains, and trained labor. Switching entire rifle or mortar stocks in the middle of a coalition deployment was not a trivial choice. The British had invested in the Piat's tooling and training pipeline by the time American rockets were offered for broad adoption. To ask infantry units to change weapons would have meant more training, more logistics, and short-term reductions in combat readiness. When a weapon that fit the brigade's tactical doctrine was already on hand, the balance tipped toward continuity. The American bazooka's arrival was timely for U.S. forces, but tactically misaligned with British priorities and industrial commitments. This is where the shocking reason in the title becomes clear. Britain's refusal was not vanity or stubbornness, it was an active, pragmatic assessment. The Piat solved a real British problem, fighting in built-up terrain with minimal exposure, because it eliminated backblast. That single attribute was worth accepting weight, awkward cocking mechanisms, and a shorter range. Britain had the men, the training, and the production lines already in motion to put Piats into the hands of soldiers who would need them most. When the two systems met the demands of different theaters, both found their place. Combat records across Tunisia, Sicily, the Italian mainland, Normandy, and Arnhem offer a complex picture. At times, bazookas performed notably in open engagements. At others, Piats proved decisive in cramped urban fights. Statistically, the Piat's contribution to early overlord losses attributed to infantry anti-tank teams, about 7%, signals its battlefield role without turning it into a miracle. Individual stories, including several Victoria Cross actions connected to Piat use, add emotional weight. Soldiers willingly exposed themselves, endured the weapon's burdens, and in many cases prevented greater casualties by stopping armored charges at close range. Again, those citations and personal details merit careful verification in primary records, but they match the broader pattern of the Piat's gritty service. There were other practical problems that colored views on the bazooka. Rocket motors and warhead reliability varied with conditions. Humid, salty air could corrode components. Battlefield dirt and mud interfered with firing mechanisms. The backblast itself, besides giving away position, could injure or ignite nearby combustible material, making indoor or close-quarter use hazardous. For British doctrine, which anticipated much of the fighting in the close quarters, these vulnerabilities were disqualifying. The Piat was not free from engineering sins. The spigot system's mechanical shock and spring arrangements produced violent recoil and occasional premature detonations. The need to cock by hand, often against a spring assembly, sapped energy at critical moments. Training mitigated some of the burden, and crews developed muscle memory and techniques to work around the weapon's demands. Even so, the Piat's ergonomics were unforgiving. Over time, as post-war designs improved and newer rocket launchers and recoilless rifles became available, the Piat's limitations became more obvious, and it was phased out in favor of more manageable systems.
Yet the story is not simply one of obsolescence. The Piat solved a tactical problem at a critical time, and in conditions where a rocket could not. The British decision to reject the American bazooka for widespread adoption within their forces was rooted in that tactical reality and in the practicalities of war production. Zero backblast meant survival in buildings and trenches. Production already committed meant staying the course through training and supply chains. Those two reasons together explain a choice that otherwise looks perverse when you see a rocket split a Panzer in a filmed demonstration. In the long arc of weapons development, the bazooka's lineage proved influential. Its shoulder-fired rocket principle evolved into post-war designs and helped inspire the more robust handheld anti-tank weapons, systems whose balance of portability and firepower would be refined by later designers. The Piat, by contrast, was closer to an evolutionary dead end. Its spigot concept solved an immediate tactical need, but did not scale as cleanly into the ergonomically preferable systems that followed. It left, however, an unmistakable tactical lesson. A single mechanical characteristic, no backblast, can be strategically decisive when it aligns with doctrine and terrain.
So, when historians say the British rejected the bazooka after that dramatic demonstration in Egypt, the fuller sentence is different and less sensational. Britain declined to change course because the Piat already matched what they expected to face, and industrial commitments made the Piat the practical choice. That refusal looked surprising in a moment of theater, an explosive rocket punching through armor, but it makes sense when you look at the realities of infantry survival, manufacturing inertia, and the kind of fighting British soldiers were preparing to endure. There is a final human angle to this tale. War is a crucible where imperfect tools meet imperfect people. Men trained with what they had. Some swore by the Piat despite its curse of weight and temperament. Others preferred the lighter, faster bazooka when terrain allowed. Both weapons demanded courage and skill, and both failed at times. The names attached to acts of heroism, men who charged tanks with a Piat or sheltered comrades while a bazooka team took a risky shot, are reminders that equipment alone does not win battles. People do. At the same time, equipment shapes what people can do. The Piat's silence permitted certain brave acts that would have been suicidal with a backblast behind the shooter. In the end, the shocking reason is simple and, in its way, sobering. Britain rejected the American bazooka not because of pride, not because of ignorance, but because of a deliberate match between tactical need and production reality. The Piat's zero backblast fit the terrain and doctrine that British infantry would face from 1943 onward, and production commitments made that abandoning impractical. That choice had real battlefield consequences, some tragic, some heroic, and it shaped the experience of infantry fighting from the hedgerows of Normandy to the ruins of Arnhem. If you want more deep dives into how design trade-offs shaped the fighting in World War II, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one waiting to be untangled. The Piat and the bazooka each left a footprint in military history. One solved an immediate tactical problem at significant cost. The other became the technological ancestor of later, more refined shoulder-fired rockets. Both remind us that wartime innovation is rarely a straight line. It is a series of pragmatic decisions driven by where armies expect to fight, what factories can produce, and what soldiers can reasonably be asked to do under fire. Britain's refusal of the bazooka is not an embarrassment in hindsight, but a case study in making wartime choices when the margin between life and death is measured in yards, seconds, and the ability to fire without announcing yourself to the entire battlefield. For sources and deeper reading on PAT development, bazooka evaluations, and the battlefield analyses that shaped these decisions, check the links in the description. And tell us in the comments, which World War II weapon do you think changed the most because of battlefield conditions?